Hi there, I'm Sonja, and I write, and welcome to episode 7 of My Fanfiction audiobook, aka Library Time for Small School Children. If you hear a lot of noise in the background, like some crashing, banging, pitter-pattering, if you will, it's raining outside. But that's fantastic because rainy days make the perfect days for listening to audiobooks like this one. And by chance, if you're new here, howdy, I'm Sonja, and every Monday I upload one new episode for my series, My Fanfiction audiobook, where I narrate a fanfiction that I'm writing based on Hirohiko Araki's original story, Jojo's Bizarre Adventure Part 5, to you all here on YouTube in the style of an audiobook. If you're interested in learning more about the nitty-gritty of the audiobook series, you can always check out my description below. In every video, I have a huge amount of detail going on down there. So if you're ever confused when you're watching one of my videos, just slide into the description and I'm pretty sure that will help you out. And if you're interested in reading about a more romancy twist on the Golden Wind story, you should also check out my Wattpad account titled Minecraft Sheeps. Yes, that's my actual author name on Wattpad, where you can find the original written story of Guilty Conscience that you can access for free. So I don't want to keep you guys any longer. It's a beautiful afternoon for reading, so let's get straight into the video. Here is Guilty Conscience Chapter 4, Part 1. The Importance of a Seatbelt. The steady pulsing of a headache began to bloom across Wyan's forehead. Her hands remained neatly cradled in her lap, and her chin was tucked down between the curves of her collarbone. She sat quietly, sandwiched between two mafioso in the back of a van. Her senses were overrun by a mix of cologne, car freshener, and only a subtle hint of sour teenage body odor. The vehicle smelt like a high school hallway, and Wyan grew uncomfortable with the familiarity of it. To her left sat the lean, raven-haired boy, Narancia, she thought to be far too young for the mafia, and to her right sat the gunslinger, Mista, who was already dozing off. If it weren't for the small talk that floated in the air, Mista would have already been asleep by now. The boys occupied most of their time in the van chatting amongst themselves, acting as though they had no knowledge of Wyan's presence. But, in hindsight, Wyan was grateful for their blatant disregard. She preferred keeping to herself. From beyond the tinted glass, Wyan could see that the van of criminals moved quickly away from Via Romana and closer to the bustle of the city. The more people to see, the easier it was for the mobsters to become lost in the crowd. It was exactly what they wanted, to become one with the swarm and to make things difficult for the police who would soon be searching for them. The vehicle was mostly silent, save for the chit-chat that floated around the back seats, and unfortunately for her, Wyan was stuck in between their banter, the same two mobsters that had blown up her car. Her rental car, had found no problem in settling themselves on either side of where she sat. She would somehow have to explain the absence of her car to the motor shop she leased it from, and the boys didn't seem to care for her predicament. Wyan couldn't tell if Mista and Narancia had seen her pout and chose to ignore it, or if they were too distracted by their own arrogance to see the displeasure written all over her face. Moments after seating themselves beside her, Wyan demanded an explanation for their choice of car. Why did they choose her car out of the 60 other vehicles that lined the private parking lot? And it came as no surprise when Narancia claimed that Wyan's car was cheap-looking, and so he and Mista took the liberty of removing it from the luxury venue. It was to serve as a distraction, to get the cops to look one way while the Bodyguard Squad ran the other. Without the explosion, the cops would have been all over us by now, is what Narancia added with a toothy grin. But their responses only drew Wyan into a deeper pit of frustration, and so she chose to keep her head down and sulk in silence. though nobody made a move to talk with her anyways, or not until one of the boys swung his head in her direction. "Oh, come on, lady. You can't pout like that forever. I feel like every time I look at you, your lip gets fatter and your eyes get droopier." Mista spoke in a raspy whine. His head was tilted to the side so that he could get a clear view of Wyan's entire face. And when she looked at him, deep pools of coffee brown stared back at her. His eyes were so handsomely dark that she could see her own reflection. "How do you expect me to be able to drive around now that my car is in pieces? And what about the rental place? What should I say to them?" she questioned. But her pointed features faded away once she saw only a flash of pity sweep across the gunslinger's face. "Maybe if I hadn't screwed Bucciarotti's team over, my car wouldn't be in smithereens," she thought to herself. Though she knew that she was mostly at fault, for getting the attention of everyone at the Pink Martini and for alerting the traitors of the Bodyguard Squad's presence, Wyden couldn't help but be frustrated with the two arsonists. Without taking so much as a glance, Wyan felt Fugo's cold eyes peering at her from the rearview mirror. She turned from the gunslinger and to the strawberry blonde who took up the driver's seat, and she waited, curious as to what he might say. "Well, Miss Wyan, I would say that it's a good thing that they disposed of your car." "And why's that?" she bit back, confused and offended at the thought that the strawberry blonde, Fugo, might have just insulted her car. "Well, the police are probably scanning every plate in that parking lot. If your car remained intact, the officers would have been led to the company where you initially rented the vehicle. And correct me if I'm wrong, but those types of businesses keep all of their clients' information on hand, like full name, address, date of birth, and so on." Wyan stared up at Fugo in silence as he continued to glance between the rearview mirror, at her, and back to the road. The boy had a point. If she were smart, she would have parked her car at least one street over to avoid the cops. But she hadn't been thinking ahead, and she was too ashamed to admit that Fugo was right. So instead, she once again retreated to a heavy silence, while a deep shade of red crawled over her features. "And hey, just tell the rental place that you lost the car. They can't charge you for something you lost." Mista gave her a tight-lipped grin. She looked at him, waiting for the gunslinger to say that he was joking. But as he let out a sigh and leaned back into his seat, Wyan knew that the boy was being serious. Oh my goodness, he isn't joking. "I believe a better excuse would be that the vehicle was stolen. Most oftentimes, leasing companies will cover a majority of the car's cost with insurance. So long as you're able to make a report for a missing vehicle to the police, you should be fine. Mostly." Fugo's stare made Wyan sit straighter. Though his tone was calm, with a reasonable lilt to his voice, his purple eyes seemed to follow her every breath, catch on to the way her tongue flicked up when she spoke, latched to her inability to understand certain concepts, pierced her movements. His eyes made her wonder, am I talking too fast? Too slow? Do I look okay? Am I speaking out of place? Should I be complaining? Should I complain more? Fugo's eyes judged. They met her stare with an unhidden displeasure. She couldn't tell if she was doing anything right or wrong when he looked at her. And so, in order to avoid any more judgment that he could possibly send wordlessly crashing towards her, Wyan simply nodded and found herself looking out the window. Trees painted in deep shades of green flew by as the van moved onwards. The sun had set, and the sky cooled of all bright colors, taking on shades of heavy blues and purples. Via Romana, one of the wealthier streets in Napoli, remained on the outer edge of the city, with only a few small buildings occupying the surrounding land. As the mobsters were brought closer to the interior of the city, more restaurants, civilians shopping and eating in the early night, streetlights, and more cars filled Wyan's view. The idea of getting lost in the commotion of the city made her shoulders loosen. Bucciarotти had told her that she would be driven back to the city prison so that she could be officially dismissed by the capo, Polpo. The head of the Bodyguard Squad had been adamant about Wyan's immediate retirement from her temporary position in Passione upon their arrival back into the main streets of the city. She knew that she would miss his kindness, though she only knew the man briefly. A bolt of curiosity struck Wyan, and she spoke before she could make a second thought. "So, now that you all know that there's a traitor in Abbacchio's, what are you gonna do?" Hello, and welcome back, I guess. Thank you so much for sticking around all the way to the end of this episode. I really appreciate it. And I hope you stick around for next week's episode where I carry on narrating chapter 4 of Guilty Conscience, The Importance of a Seatbelt, which will be part 2. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!